We have some problems to solve here. What are the practical ways that we are going to create Australia's workforce? How are we going to get them to evolve, transform, to tackle the complex problems that the X Prize is trying to deal with, but that we know challenging us today? We need to make a better tomorrow. What can we actually do? We've got a panel of amazing brains who are going to maybe help us get through some of that problem. Let's start with the Honourable Alistair Henskins, the New South Wales Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology. I'd like to invite you up.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. I'm so appreciative that the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering invited me to speak today. So as the Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology, I spent a lot of my time going around telling people how great science is and what great scientists we have here in New South Wales. In our, we've got 6 universities in the top 200 of the world. We've got many world-leading scientists. You'll hear from Michelle Simmons in a minute. And I talk a lot about the great things that are being done in our universities and in our research facilities here in New South Wales. But the topic that we're talking about now is actually an incredibly important topic, which is talking about the future pipeline of those researchers and those technically trained people within our community at a time when arguably science and technology has never been more important. When I started as the Minister, I actually came to the realisation that I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the problem because I was a good student. My grandfather was a medical doctor. My father and mother were both scientists. My father's family were all full of engineers, and I became a lawyer. My mother wanted me to be a scientist. Maybe that was the early rebel in me. But so why, I think it's important to talk about why we aren't getting more people that want to be scientists. I think that's really the nub of the problem, and probably if we analyse that problem, and if I can draw on my own personal experience and extrapolate that out into our broader society, I would say a few things. The first is my father was an immigrant. My mother's father died at a relatively young age. I didn't grow up in a very affluent family, and so why did I sought a profession? And what the statistics tell us now is that we actually have more people wanting to study professions than we do wanting to study STEM-based qualifications. So that's a problem, and that's it's a problem of security, or perceived security, with a bit of status in occupation. So I think we really need to come to grips with the fact that with our huge immigrant population, who do very well at school, they're wanting to go into the professions. So I somewhat controversially, when I talk to young science students, I tell them, my grandfather was a doctor, but please don't do medicine. Be a scientist. You will have greater societal impact than being a GP who prescribes medication most of the day. You will have a really interesting, impactful life as a scientist. Now, this is a message that I think we need to be getting out more and more. This is the important message we need to be giving our young people. And what a great context in which we can do it. I mean, I was sitting in Cabinet when the coronavirus came into New South Wales. And, what did we do? Ultimately, we ended up with a policy that the best way to save the 35,000 people in New South Wales alone that would have died through seeking herd immunity was actually to bet on science to come up with a vaccine in a short period of time to save those lives. And that's what we did. And guess what? Science came through. In record time, in a time that many people were very sceptical that we could actually deliver a vaccine. So I think we have a good story to tell. I think we need to tell it more. We need to sell science. That would be my sort of broad prescription. We're doing a whole lot of, I guess, more micro things. We're setting up institutes of applied technology. We're trying to deal with the blurring of technical skills and university skills and getting that strict delineation more fluid and more real world. And we're doing things in our schools and so on. You can now do cybersecurity and cloud computing in our high school system. We're taking away the barrier for more than one vet subject to count towards your ATAR. We're doing a number of different things, but I think if we're really honest with ourselves, until we can sell the idea of science being a really important career and a good career, we're not going to get where we need to get. Without embarrassing Michelle, can I just say that when I get the great privilege of going around and meeting our incredibly clever scientists, I'm always amazed at how they can, in simple words, explain to a non-scientist like me what they're doing and to be able to understand what they're doing. And so the real problem is that Michelle is like the Carl Lewis of science. She is in a race to be the first to develop really important scientific technology, and it's a consuming job. You know, if we could take Michelle away from her job and put her out on the road for 6 months, we would have many more scientists in the world. But we can't do that with our great scientists because they're busy being great scientists. So it's really up to the rest of us to try and understand how important science is and to sell it. And you've got to win over the parents, right? At the end of the day, they're incredibly influential. Not so my mother, but they're incredibly influential on what their children end up doing. So that's, I think, my 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop there.
Oh, look, thank you very much, Minister. Please, grab a seat. You've actually done my job for me, so I think we'd best leave it at that. Michelle, would you please make Michelle Simmons very welcome? Now, if you think you know anything about quantum, you don't, except if you're Michelle. Please.
Thank you, Nate. So look, I'm not going to talk a lot about quantum. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey too, because I think it's also interesting, very different actually. So I think I was 13 when I realized I love physics. And it's quite an early age to realize that. And the thing that really got me was that people described things mathematically that I had only ever seen in words or visually before. And I suddenly thought, wow, you can describe the world in a completely different way, like looking from the moon down at the Earth. And I suddenly saw things that I never saw before. And anyway, I was hooked. That's the positive of me realizing that very young. But I was actually in a school where there wasn't a lot of people teaching. So they believed I was in a London school in England where they believed in independent learning. And I kid you not, they gave us books from the age of 16 to 18, the equivalent of the HSC, and told us to go away and teach ourselves. That was a trial that didn't work very well, and so most of the people in my year failed and didn't go on to university. But it did allow me a couple of things. One, it allowed me to teach myself, which actually is a very important skill. It also meant that I had boxes of experiments and we were left alone to play with them. So I learned how to build lots of experiments, and that I think really engendered my deep love of making things from a very early age. But then when I got to university and I was then taught again after many years of not being taught, I thought it was fantastic. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is what learning is all about. And I guess the message from that really for young people coming through is we can't leave it to chance that they're going to be able to teach themselves the science subjects. They are harder to learn. They're not intuitive. They do need skilled people to teach them. One of the things that I've definitely learned, and I gave a talk back in 2017 about the falling standards in the curricula here in New South Wales and across Australia. And really I'd learned that people in physics in particular have been asked to write essays in exams rather than do mathematical equations because it was believed that that was too difficult and people were leaving the subject because it was too hard. And so I've really kind of pushed over the last few years that we get the quality of the curriculum back up and we get the science, the things that physics is about back into the curriculum. I'm glad to say that it has changed. But the other thing that I've also seen, and I think it's very well established, is that a lot of the teachers now at schools are not actually trained in the subjects they're teaching. And physics in particular, maths and physics, is just dire. I think it's well known that this is dire, both in Australia but globally. And so, you wouldn't learn the piano from someone that doesn't know how to play the piano. So why would you learn physics from a biology teacher? And I guess the key thing about that is that, when you're learning a subject that's difficult, if you have a teacher that is deeply understanding of that subject and loves it, is passionate about it, that will transform your view of that subject. So when I look back of all the things that I think are most important, it is getting our teachers trained in the depth of the subject. And if you look at it, it's the maths and physics teachers, and possibly chemistry. Those are the teachers that really suffer. That's where the demand is in the schools. I'm on a school board. I know that we're always looking for teachers in that area. And I know there's a big debate at the moment about the teachers and, making sure that all the teachers have the same salaries. But if the demand is higher for physics and maths teachers, then we should be paying them higher. They can easily get jobs in industry at a lot more. So the future of our nation requires that we get those teachers into our schools so they can train people from an early age so that they love the subject. I think I've seen the subject drops off at the age of 14 to 16. That's when people start to leave the hard sciences in particular and maths. And that's really kind of the critical age at which they're going to be choosing their future. And I fully agree. You're looking at your future, you want to choose a job that's going to have security. So you want to pick a subject that's going to lead to that. And so if you at one level don't have an enthusiastic teacher, that's going to put you off. But then also if you don't know what the jobs are that are out there, that's also likely going to put you off. Now I was hoping my slides would be playing in the background. There you go. So to combat that, so I've got two reasons for me doing this. One is I think it's absolutely essential we show young people what it is we do in our labs. So we opened up a few years back from literally 5-year-olds onwards. Roughly 200 school children per year come into our labs to see what we're doing. So we're trying to build a quantum computer. There's a lot of high-tech equipment that we use. I was going out to schools, which I do love. I actually honestly really enjoy going out and talking to schools. But I realised actually getting them to see what we do, touch what we do, come into the labs. They can't play with some of this equipment, but they can do some of the things that we do in our labs. And we've been doing that now for a few years. You can see some of the companies, these are the clean room suits that they sponsor. They give it to us for free so we can bring the children in. But that really tangibly allows them to see what the possibility and what the futures are. The researchers in our company love it because it's just a fun day, honestly. And seeing young people, they suck things up really easily. But also it teaches them that, that they have to take care of the future as well. It's not just one individual, it's everybody is responsible for the future. So we do this every year. We also have school children come in all the way through from high school. We bring them through. They do final year projects with us. They go all the way through university. They actually come and do PhDs with us. So we've had people that have started with us in the early teens come all the way through and do a PhD with us. So that kind of investment does work, although obviously it's not scalable with just one group doing it. So I do encourage all the people in our centre to do it. But it also teaches them what the skills are. And so they always ask, what is it that I should do? And it's very clear to me in our labs, deep tech skills where you're making things, where you're coding. Every piece of equipment we have, you have to write computer codes for. So we get them coding from an early age. We actually get them to try some of the experiments, see the researchers doing it. So hands-on skills, coding, statistics, maths, these are the kind of the key skills that we need for the future. It isn't perhaps scalable, but I do think it's on every scientist in Australia to bring people into their schools, even if they're trying to build a quantum computer. It is a fun thing to do, and I think it's absolutely essential. So my 3 messages are, I guess, 1, make sure that our teachers are trained in the way that they really need to be for the future. That means paying some of the teachers higher if they need to be. And then I think I would make coding compulsory in all schools because I think it's a skill, like a language, that everyone's going to need. So with that,
yeah,
I'll take my seat.
Oh, please, please. School kids into labs, along with very excited breakfast television presenters, please, and camera crews, if I can. Let's talk more. Let's get further into the technology of driving the solution. Andy Penn needs very little introduction at all. Please make him welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Nate. Let me just sort this out. Great pleasure to be with you here today. And look, I know you're going to cover a lot of ground, so I thought I would narrow my comments on two areas in particular. And the first is skills in cybersecurity, and the second is the importance of supply chain in critical technologies and global technology standards and the related skills associated with that for us to play a role. But I thought I would start by just sharing that I have to admit, I do sometimes find the debate on skills a bit frustrating. It feels like it's an unsolvable problem. So many challenges get raised, issues get conflated, they get confused, we talk at cross purposes, and it's like we seem to be sort of looking for this single solution that's going to solve the problem. It evades us and we just get frustrated and just feel as if we're not doing enough. And the fact is the rate of digital adoption is, of course, it's accelerated dramatically in the recent few years, particularly as a consequence of COVID. And as you heard from Hugh, we're also sitting on the cusp of some really interesting new technologies that are effectively going to enable us to take a whole new leap forward again in technology innovation as we digitise the physical world through connecting physical things with billions of sensors connected over 5G telecommunications equipment, with, of course, increasing compute power and quantum obviously around the corner as well. So the opportunities that this presents are enormous. Opportunities for productivity, for healthcare, for our well-being, for society, for so many different areas. And so I see this as an opportunity we should be capitalising on, not something we should really be beating ourselves up on. And so, but of course it takes an enormous amount of reskilling and upskilling, and we shouldn't really be surprised by that, or I don't think we should be concerned by it, because it's an exciting opportunity. And I think as a nation state, what we need to do is we need to deliver those skills obviously faster than our competitors, which are other nation states. And that's the bottom line. It's not a problem that we're ever going to be able to solve completely. I do think, therefore, though, if we could quieten the noise a little bit around some of the programs and actually just move forward confidently, and I think you made a point again, Hugh, with some reasonably simple national programs. Programs, for example, to standardise the skills landscape so we can get more alignment and consistency in our curriculums. In medicine, we understand what an oncologist does, we understand what a cardiologist is, a GP is, a radiologist. We need to bring the same sort of clarity and precision to skills in the digital landscape. Programs to increase the supply of teaching and the skills in teaching as well, and evolve those teaching methods, micro-credentials, etc. Programs and incentives to obviously increase the number of people participating in learning those skills, all the way through from kinder, as we heard, through all the way through the schooling system to the workplace. Programs to systematically address the many, many, many micro-reforms that we need in the administrative and the regulatory systems that affect this, in visa rules and processes and workplace regulations. So I'm not saying all of this is easy, but I do think we make it a bit harder by overcomplicating the debate and pursuing our pet passions and vested interests. But with that, let me just turn to the two topics I mentioned. Firstly, cybersecurity. Because obviously, as the rate of digital adoption increases, so does our vulnerability to malicious actors. And of course, we've seen very real examples of that recently with the Optus and the Medicare hacks. We shouldn't be naive enough, though, however, to believe that others are not also vulnerable. We all hold some level of customer data. Every business, every industry, every institution in the country. In fact, nobody holds more customer data than government. Federal government, state governments, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Centrelink, whether it's the ATO, whether it's passports. The governments hold more customer data than anybody else. And frankly, the progress that government has been making in hardening its own systems around defencing and cyber has been disappointing, as I reported recently as the chair of the Industry Advisory Committee on cyber security. Now, that's not to beat up on government. My point is, I just think they need to be a little bit careful when they're pointing the gun at industry and business and making comments about the level of defences that exist when there's a lot more that needs to be done. The increase in malicious activity has obviously been dramatic. Last year, Telstra basically blocked 1 billion malicious emails and 200 million scam calls. We block as a company 1,500 malicious SMSs every minute. So it is a very, very significant problem, which is obviously increasing. Undoubtedly, therefore, there are going to be more and deep demand for deep technical skills in cyber, and it has to be a priority. But we also need to make sure that we don't end up in a talent war between government and industry. A lot of these resources need to be, well, we need to collaborate more to ensure that we can take advantage of these resources. The $10 billion Red Spice program, which the government is implementing, will effectively double the number of resources in the Australian Signals Directorate to improve our offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. That will require another 2,000 deep cyber technology experts. So it's a really important area. The other thing I would say, though, that is, as well as deepening our talent in cyber, we also need to build basic cyber security skills into other digital curriculums. The bottom line is the best way to defend against cyber activity and malicious actors in the first place is to build the defences into digital products and services. So we need more basic skills with our data scientists, with our software engineers, with our robotic engineers as well. The other thing I was just going to comment on briefly before we go to a bit more of a discussion was really in relation to critical technologies. Now, our digital future obviously depends on a secure and effective digital platforms and digital infrastructure. So protecting those from a cyber point of view is important, but it's actually not the most serious issue that I am concerned about or I worry about, because many of these critical technologies we need access to in the longer term. And actually in Australia, we're not part of the supply chain. And two in particular have become very, very concentrated. That is in relation to telecommunications radio access equipment such as 5G and also silicon chips. And getting access to these in the longer term is going to be crucially important. Now, Australia has no manufacturing capability in either of these, and frankly is never going to. That isn't something that we can reverse, but we can play a role in the policy and technical dialogue internationally where we are well regarded, and therefore our deep involvement in the technical streams of the international security collaborations, so the Five Eyes, the Quad, AUKUS, is really, really important. And then finally, one more related issue in relation to all of this is in global industry standards, another area where we've got to participate and have the skills to do so. We take it for granted today that essentially our technology is interoperable, that we'll pick up our mobile phone, we'll get off the plane in the US and we'll turn it on and it will roam onto somebody else's network, or that our computers will talk to each other. That doesn't happen by accident. There are multiples of bodies globally that are working hard to get alignment around technology standards, but these are becoming increasingly politicised with different philosophies approaching them. And so we've never been more at risk of fragmentation in the standards sector of the technology world. So it's another area where Australia has to play a key role in the debate, and obviously where we need to continue to build the skills to do so. So I'll leave my comments there and happily join the panel.
Wonderful, please. Thank you so much, Andy. All right, so the one thing that I'm getting, first of all, actually, if you're watching online and you feel like you're asking a question, I'm ready to go. Please jump in. The first thing I'm getting from all three of you is that, well, except maybe Andy, your feelings may be a little bit different, that we need to get kids excited. We need frameworks to get that excitement turned into actual skill. Where's the first point we've got to do that? Like, what's the big key you've got to turn to kick this off? Minister?
I think you've got to start early. And I think Michelle's absolutely right. I think teachers are inspirational people, and they will light the first fuse in a future scientist. And so I think they're incredibly important. Michelle's absolutely right. We should be paying the teachers in short supply more money. But we have a one-size-fits-all. We've got a seniority system in our education system, which the Teachers Federation are resisting very strongly us changing. But I think it kind of doesn't make sense the way the system works at the moment.
I feel you've got a thought.
Oh, no, all I was going to say is that it's not so much that I don't feel differently. No, I think the bottom line is the world that we live in today is a digital world. There is no curriculum, there is no education, there is no training and development that should not include digital. It's almost like the cybersecurity thing. We sort of think about cybersecurity as differently than we think about physical security. It's just the same stuff. It's just happening online, and our world's going to be increasing online. And so, to me, it's sort of less about, well, how do we get to a stage where it's less about we need to add digital into our curriculum, that it is actually, our curriculum is built in a digital world. It's fully integrated. It's not something separate.
It still gives me pause when I think about primary school teachers going, oh, we've got to include STEM. I don't understand how you don't include STEM in everything that you do. Michelle, is it that we need to teach our teachers better? Is it that we need legislation? Where do we get that going?
Look, I think I've understood it's a very difficult problem because the teachers' unions don't necessarily want it, but you have to pay the teachers that are needed higher. I think if you talk to them, the teachers that do want to do it, they don't have the skills. So having them trained in the subject is quite critical. So somehow rewarding people that are trained in the subject. If you think about it, anyone that does a degree and then goes to do teaching, as opposed to people that just do a teaching degree, it's actually longer. So you're punishing them. So you're actually pushing away the people that you want to come into those subjects where there's a lack of teaching. And so there has to be some kind of change, I think, at the school level to address that.
I used to, a million years ago, I became a science communicator and used to go to, as part of my training, go to schools and get to talk to kids from kindy all the way up through high school. And there was one thing that I remember is those kindy kids, you'd say, who likes science? And the whole room would be like, yeah! And you'd throw a bit of paper in the air and they'd fall apart and think it was the most exciting thing they'd ever seen. Progressively, probably from about 9, 10 years old, the number of hands going up in that room when you asked that question just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until at the end of high school, you'd end up with a couple and it would be somebody who was definitely going to be a physicist, a couple of teachers, and maybe somebody else who had a couple of people who had a very clear defined career in mind. Is it that we can't turn excitement of science into a clear future in terms of career?
I think one thing that you said, Michelle, really resonated with me, which is that physics isn't intuitive, and I think digital isn't intuitive, and I think a lot of people struggle with it who haven't necessarily grown up. I mean, I'm of an age where I started my career. We didn't have the internet when we started my career. We had punch cards and paper tape were the first computers that I worked with when I was working. And so it's not intuitive, and it's not actually easy to get your head around it. And again, I use this example in cybersecurity, is that for example, when you walk through an airport, you go through security checks, you unpack your bag, you'll go through one of those sort of screening things. It might be an old one or it might be one of the new ones where you have your hands up. Yeah. By the time you've got on the plane, you have developed a physical appreciation of the level of security that you have experienced. You have no conception of that when you're doing things online because it's just intuitively difficult to do so. So how we how we help people sort of understand and go from the practical, take the intuitive and go to the practical. I do think it probably requires a skill set that hasn't been as necessary in our education systems in the past.
So I have a follow-on to that. So I think one of the things I've been horrified by is I'll get first and second year undergraduates, particularly females, who have not done coding at schools. And when I talk to them that they should do coding, they're like, oh, I haven't done it. So, I've kind of missed that boat. So they're 18 years old and they've ruled out anything to do with coding for their life. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, So we've got to get it down in the school so that it's intuitive. They learn it so young that they don't even consider it something that they can't do.
It's like language, isn't it?
It's like language.
One of the first things I'm doing, I stepped down from Telstra a few weeks ago. My wife and I are buying a home in Mexico. And so I'm currently learning Spanish. I can't believe how hard it is at the age of nearly 60 to start learning a new language. But to your point, languages, we all know, if you can get them young.
I think that's one of the biggest disservices we do ourselves, is not having more than one language from the get-go. And you're right, like coding is literally just another language, and it's being unafraid to try in the first place. Alistair, government here obviously does have a role to play, and right now we've just heard about the dire situation that we've got facing us, but maybe with a bit of hope on the way out. Certainly, the federal government is thinking very strongly about skills and getting people into jobs, creating jobs at a time when we're at this, we don't have any spare capacity. What should governments be doing to essentially pave the way to open the doors?
I do laugh. We had a skills ministers meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the federal government was, talking about their great skills initiative, and it was going to be giving us $165 million to go with our $3 billion investment this year in skills and training from the state government. And I thought, really, they're kidding themselves. We've got a record skills budget in New South Wales. Our big problem at the moment is we don't have people to skill.
Yeah.
We've got a massive labour shortage, and it's completely understandable if you understand mathematics. We've got this huge demographic blip called the baby boomer generation, and more people are leaving the workforce than are coming in at the other end. We've been following up that mathematical discontinuity with immigration, putting people in at the end, and we just had a global pandemic where we're net 350,000 less people coming into our society. So that's what's creating our labour shortage. But what we're really talking about in this session, I think, is not what is a short-term glitch. We're talking about a longer-term pipeline. So we're actually, in New South Wales, we're trying to lead the nation in terms of what we're doing in vocational education. We're looking at the idea of continuous learning. We got David Gonski and Peter Shergold to do a report on the future of vocational education in our state. Lifelong learning is going to be an aspect of our world, so that's really interesting, Michelle's story about the 18-year-olds and coding, because I was a barrister for 20 years, and every brief I got was like a new assignment.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've spent my life learning different things, and then part of that brief might be to cross-examine a professor like Michelle in the witness box, and so I've got to have a degree of technical understanding of what Michelle's doing to be able to conduct that cross-examination. So sometimes you're actually getting at a very high technical level as a barrister to prepare your cases. So I think we've got to think of our future world as being everyone's going to be like a barrister, because technology is changing and interrupting what we do in the workforce so rapidly. Every 5 years we're probably going to have a significant change in our workplace. Not so much Michelle, who's spent 15 years researching quantum computing, but most of us, and artificial intelligence and all the rest of it will give us a capacity for information which we've never had before. I think we need to change our mindset. So what we're doing is, we've got, for example, Careers New South Wales, which we've just set up, which is a whole-of-life careers advisory service with industry mentors as well as career advisors that can actually help people in that transition as their jobs become continuously interrupted. We're setting up institutes of applied technology where we're actually getting industry, the universities and TAFE working together to be rapidly skilling people in emerging skills. A plumber, a carpenter, our vocational education system is geared towards traditional skills which don't change very much. But when Michelle buys a new piece of equipment where there might only be 30 in the world, who's going to run it? Typically now it's PhD students performing technical tasks because no one has those skills. So we've got to have a system which is rapidly able to adapt, and we're talking about micro-credentials and our institutes of applied technology. And we've got no federal funding for any of that. New South Wales is we've invested $250 million in capital expenditure and just committed hundreds of millions of dollars in operational expenditure to run them because we're ahead of the rest of the pack. We have the most complex, diverse economy in Australia here in New South Wales. We can't wait for Tasmania to decide in a federal government skills system that it's a good idea to start having micro-credentials. So we're not being pulled back by the ACT or Tasmania, we're just going ahead.
I am, of course, very ABC and always very impartial. I think we could all agree that all levels of government, regardless of their stripe, realise that skills are really important. And actually, you know, our plumbers do need to learn coding as we move into this internet of everything, right? Where everything's so interconnected and also literally connected online.
And you know what we're doing? In our IAT at Meadowbank, we've got all the traditional trades with our technical students doing courses with Microsoft. And they're all given a laptop and we're upskilling them and we're putting them in an ecosystem where they're comfortable with digital technology. So we are actually doing that and it is important.
Yeah, we all need to be comfortable because increasingly it's harder to escape. And that's why the cybersecurity situation is so important. You've had a bit of a go at government there, saying, "Oi, get ready, prepare yourselves, and be good." Telstra, perhaps you could argue, just dodged the bullet. Optus got it first. Like, you know, any of our companies could be the subject of these sorts of quite sophisticated and sometimes very unsophisticated attacks. And Telstra actually is in an interesting position. Not a lot of people know about Telstra Health and the work that you're doing there. Things like the National Cancer Screening Register, which is a lot of data and a lot of government data from Medicare. What is Telstra doing, or what has Telstra been doing to really, I guess, be a step ahead?
Yeah, and whether we dodged a bullet or not, I mean, look, I think the point is that, you know, Optus's defences may have been weaker than they should have been. I'm sure that's probably right. But my point is that there is not a company and a government in the country that doesn't have vulnerabilities and isn't exposed. And my bit of a stab at government, and I've said to them privately as well as publicly, is, look, don't come out guns blazing, shooting down Optus. That's not the right response. The right response is actually because you want people to be open and transparent. Of course, they're going to be accountable. You know, they'll be open to liability, class action, and all the rest of it. That will all look after itself. Actually, what we need is a constructive response to this, recognising that it can happen to anybody. There are vulnerabilities. As I said, there isn't an organisation in the world, or whether it's an education organisation, whether it's a government, whether it's a company, it doesn't matter, that doesn't have some element of customer data, and you have a responsibility to protect that as best you possibly can. And when you're a very large, complex company or a complex government with multiples of different systems and legacies and, you know, APIs opening out onto the internet, there's going to be vulnerabilities. And I do think that I was doing a talk at the JPC3, which is the Joint Policing Cyber Initiative that the state, federal and the state police and Australian Cybersecurity Criminal Investigation Commission have sort of put together. And I was sort of saying, it's sort of interesting because they sort of think about, they've got policing and then they've got the sort of cyber crime unit. And I'm saying, but there isn't a crime today that doesn't have a digital footprint. There is not a crime that is committed that doesn't have a digital footprint. I can't think of one. And so therefore...
There are very few.
It's got to be...
There are some, but there are very few.
Well, yeah, I know, but my point is...
Minister,
I'll guarantee you that every criminal will be leaving some degree of
you're right.
Digital footprint.
Yeah,
and if you... I mean, I can't go into the detail of this, but Chloe, the young girl who was abducted in Western Australia, we helped solve that, identified where Chloe was, and we helped solve that and recover Chloe. That was a technology solution.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got to see cyber and or digital less as a sort of an adjunct, and it's got to be much more integrated into pretty much every vocation.
We've got some questions, I believe, in the room. Please.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Chapman, Head of Department of Science from Townsville State High School and also co-chair of Women in STEM Australia. Firstly, like most things, Representation in terms of a voice of either students or a teacher on a panel would be wonderful. Just for the fact that just because you have a joke book doesn't make you a comedian. So just because people have been to school doesn't mean they know what the current situation is in schools. My challenge, I guess, is for industry and organisations to realise there are barriers just in access. My school has 50% of the students that don't have access to a computer or the internet. So how do they learn to be digitally literate when they don't have access? There are lots of barriers in terms of educators wanting the best for their students but not being able to afford to buy 400 computers and internet access for those students. So coming all the way back into a classroom, the students need those basic things, and teachers really want to do the best for their kids. I'm here today helping kids that are engaging in the student space because I want them to have a future and be the best, like Michelle, for example, and go on to discover new things. But I do think a lot of times teachers are left without a seat at the table. The voice of students, they don't have a seat at the table. They're very different learners to when I was at school and to when a lot of other people were at school. And I think those voices need to be heard and listened to, and they need to be able to inform our curriculum, inform the funding. You hear Australian Chief Scientist Cathy Foley visited my school earlier this year, and she was talking about we need 129,000 people in artificial intelligence. And I said, well, how much money is going into schools? How much money is building that pathway for those kids to see their future? To me, there's too much focus on the forest, the trees that are growing, and not enough focus on those tiny little seeds and plants that need the nurturing and growth. And to me, it's hearing the young people's voice, hearing teachers' voice about the realities of what they need and the importance of that as a part of informing our future. So it's not really a question, but I do encourage people in the future to have that perspective, because our young people are so underrated and they are marvellous. They just need the opportunity, and a lot of times the funding in schools to be able to step forth and shine, and hopefully one day be on a panel like the one that we're listening to today. So thank you for the conversation, but next time there should be 2 more seats up there.
Absolutely. We'll take that as a comment. No, very, very, very noted, and a very good point. Was there any more in the room? Oh, we've got another one right. Oh, first of all, question or comment?
It's probably going to be a comment, actually.
Can you put a question mark like at the end?
I'll try and put a question in. Don't worry, there will be one. So my name's Justine Izzard. I'm from McClelland College in Melbourne, and very much enjoying this conference. And just to extend on what Sarah was just saying, this is, I absolutely teach, students should have the best types of teachers, highly qualified teachers, but teachers are also up against losing a lot of their autonomy in the classroom. There is essentially more senior people telling them that aren't even in their subject area how things should be done. It's all under the guise of something called the instructional curriculum. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing in classrooms, and I know it's a lot to do with the fact that, you know, globally we're not scoring as well as we have, and I actually think there's probably a correlation between teachers losing autonomy and that actually happening, by the way. But what I think is if teachers have more autonomy and can get on with their job in the classroom, what I think is we're going to see, you know, better outcomes for our students. Because I see it. I see teachers being told how their classrooms should be run by people who are more senior but not in the same subject area. Now, it's a bigger system than just a school because they're answerable to governments, education departments, who also think that they can do the job better than teachers. So there's a bit of a system, and I want to bring this conversation to this room because I know there's lots of key people here who need to know this, because it's not a matter of just, you know, paying teachers more, even though, let's be honest, that'd be really good.
Please also do that.
Yeah. But, and also having highly qualified teachers, but it's also about letting teachers do what they're trained to do and giving them back that autonomy. We look to the Scandinavian countries where their curriculum is far, their demands are far, far less, but they're getting greater results. Well, there's obviously something in that. So in terms of, and I promised a question, so here we go. In terms of what I'm saying in response to that, and I noticed there's a minister on the end there as well, so I'd love to hear from you as well. But how can governments help teachers, help their students get to the places that they want to get to?
Minister.
Look, one thing I was sort of wanting to say earlier on, which I think is relevant to this, is in terms of lighting that fuse, I think it's incredibly important to be linking science to the world around us at a very early stage, because you know, I did calculus 3-unit maths for the HSC, and it wasn't until I did a statistics course at university that I actually realised that that had some non-just theoretical application. And so I think we need to focus on making science real. It's all around us. You know, science can explain the world around us so powerfully, and I think that is where we could focus more in our education system to pique that interest. I take on board your points. I always was sceptical back in the Julia Gillard years when we put a whole lot of money into education. It seemed as if it was for the sake of it rather than with a plan as to how that money could be best spent. And I think we're kind of wearing the consequences of that now because there wasn't a coherent plan as to how to maximise our taxpayer dollar within our education system. I think that's some of the things that we're talking about now, and the structure of teaching and flexibility and autonomy of teachers. All of those issues, I think, are part of that conversation.
Making sure that those stakeholders have a voice as well in that conversation is crucial. Throwing money at a problem isn't just going to solve it. I'm so sorry. We are out of time. This conversation needs to go on further, and I encourage you all, please, to do that, because this isn't a problem that's going away anytime soon, and it's something we've got to solve. But please join me in thanking our panel members. Thank you so much for your insights.